Hi guys. Tonight, I want to take you deep into the shadows of medieval Europe, where passion burned quietly behind stone walls, and every forbidden glance could change a life forever. Imagine a world of silent corridors, candlelit secrets, and love that risked everything: reputation, safety, even survival. These hidden tales are not about kings or knights, but about ordinary souls drawn together by fate, trapped by rules they never chose. But before we begin, if you're someone who loves slow, curious dives into forgotten worlds, tap the like button, subscribe, and let me know in the comments where you're watching from. I'd love to get to know my viewers better. In the heart of the Middle Ages, life moved by strict codes and expectations. Nobility married for alliances, peasants for survival, and anyone who dared cross those lines risked harsh punishment. But love has a way of blossoming in the most unexpected places, quietly growing where no one is supposed to notice. Picture a vast manor, surrounded by misty fields and guarded gates. Here, Eleanor, the youngest daughter of a baron, spends her days learning embroidery and prayers, always under the watchful eyes of servants and family. Her world is small and predictable until she meets Luke, a young, stable hand with quick hands and a secretive smile. Their first meeting is accidental. In the orchard at dusk, the sky painted with soft purples and gold, Eleanor is lost in thought, gazing at the clouds, when Luke's gentle cough startles her. He bows quickly, apologizing, but she senses the nervousness in his voice. She notices his hands are rough from work, but his eyes are soft, holding an unspoken story. They exchange only a few words, just enough to spark a curiosity neither can ignore. In the days that follow, Eleanor finds herself wandering the orchard more often, hoping to see Luke again. She tells herself it's just for the fresh air or the beauty of the apples in bloom, but her heart beats faster each time she glimpses his figure among the trees. Luke, for his part, tries to keep his distance, knowing too well the consequences of being caught. But fate, it seems, is a patient matchmaker. One evening, as dusk settles, a gentle rain begins to fall. Eleanor, caught without her cloak, seeks shelter in an old stone shed at the edge of the orchard. She barely notices Luke already inside, tending to some tools, until their eyes meet. There is a long moment of silence, broken only by the rain drumming on the roof. This time, neither rushes to leave. They speak quietly, voices barely above a whisper, sharing stories of childhood dreams and secret hopes. As the candlelight flickers and the rain continues, something shifts between them, an understanding, deep and wordless. For a moment, the world outside disappears. Here, in the quiet, surrounded by shadows and rain, two lives begin to intertwine, held together by the fragile thread of a forbidden love, growing bolder with every secret meeting. In the days that followed their encounter in the rain, Eleanor and Luke could not escape the memory of that quiet, stolen moment in the old stone shed. Every detail replayed in their minds: the soft patter of rain, the faint smell of hay, the gentle glow of candlelight reflected in the other's eyes. Each went about their daily tasks with an odd new energy, a flutter of anticipation warming even the coldest mornings. Eleanor's world, once confined to routines and expectations, now felt vibrant and unpredictable. She looked for Luke in every corner of the estate: the stables, the orchard, even the distant fields where wildflowers grew in tangled patches. Sometimes she caught glimpses of him, leading a horse or carrying water, and sometimes their eyes would meet for a brief heartbeat before duty pulled them apart. For Luke, each day was a delicate dance. He had learned long ago to keep his head down, to blend into the background of noble life. Yet Eleanor's presence was like a bright lantern in the dark. He felt drawn to her in a way he could neither explain nor resist. At night, as he lay on his straw-filled mattress in the servants' quarters, he wondered if this was how legends began, two souls risking everything for a connection that defied the world's rules. They found new ways to speak without words. When Eleanor walked through the gardens, she sometimes left a flower on a low stone wall, a wild violet, a sprig of rosemary. Luke would find it later, his heart pounding as he slipped a small pebble or feather in its place, a silent answer. These tiny exchanges became their secret language, an unbreakable code of longing and hope. But danger lurked around every corner. Eleanor's elder brother, Sir Richard, had returned from his travels and now watched the estate with a restless, suspicious eye. He noticed his sister's dreamy moods, the way she hummed quietly when she thought no one listened. He began asking questions of the servants, and even Luke sensed the change in the air. Fear became their silent companion, always present, a shadow trailing every step. One afternoon, as the sun cast golden slants across the courtyard, Eleanor received a summons from her mother. The Baroness sat by the window, working on her embroidery, her fingers deft but her eyes sharp. She spoke of Eleanor's future, of the family's need for a strong marriage alliance, of the responsibilities that came with noble blood. Eleanor listened, her heart heavy. She wondered if her mother had sensed something, if the rumors that swirled through the halls would soon reach her father's ears. The walls felt closer than ever, every tapestry and stone a silent witness to secrets they could not keep forever. That evening, desperate to see Luke, Eleanor slipped away as the household prepared for supper. She found him waiting near the old shed, his face tense but hopeful. In the gathering twilight, they held hands for the first time, the touch sending a shiver through both of them. They spoke in hurried whispers, confessing fears and dreams, wishing the world could be simpler. "If only we could run away," Eleanor murmured, her voice trembling. "Somewhere far from here, just us." Luke squeezed her hand, his jaw tight with the weight of reality. "Someday, maybe. But for now, we must be careful." As the church bells tolled the evening hour, they parted, their hearts heavy with both joy and dread. Each knew the risks were growing, that every meeting drew them closer to discovery. Yet neither could let go of the hope that somehow their love might survive in the shadows. That night, as Eleanor knelt by her window, watching the moon rise over the misty fields, she made a silent promise to cherish every stolen moment, to hold fast to love, no matter the darkness that lay ahead. The days melted quietly into weeks, each one colored by the soft ache of longing and the gentle thrill of secret affection. Eleanor became an expert at slipping through corridors unnoticed, careful to avoid the gaze of her mother's maids and her brother's hawk-like eyes. She learned the subtle timings of the household, when the kitchens were busiest, when the old gardener napped beneath the hazel trees, and which stair creaked loudest in the east wing. Luke, too, became a ghost among the stables, always present, but never drawing attention. He fed the horses with swift, practiced movements, and kept his head lowered in the company of other servants. Still, their paths crossed in 100 hidden ways. Sometimes Eleanor would find a ribbon of her hair, one she'd dropped on purpose, tied around the handle of a bucket, or discover a scrap of parchment tucked behind a loose stone in the garden wall. On these notes, Luke wrote simple words: safe, soon, or sometimes just her name, shaped in careful lines. Every small exchange was a lifeline in a world that seemed determined to keep them apart. The estate, once a familiar backdrop to Eleanor's sheltered life, now felt like a vast maze of traps and whispered threats. Her brother's suspicions grew, his questions sharper. He caught her daydreaming by the orchard and demanded to know what occupied her mind. She answered carefully, always half-truths, while her heart raced in her chest. One afternoon, as a heavy summer storm swept across the fields, Luke found a way to send a message to Eleanor. He asked her to meet at the old mill by the river, a place neither had visited since childhood. The rain made everything slick and muffled, cloaking the world in a silver haze. Eleanor slipped out with her cloak pulled tight, her slippers nearly silent on the flagstones. She arrived at the mill, breathless and soaked, to find Luke already waiting. He looked different in the gray light, older, braver, his eyes full of longing. For a while, they just listened to the rain pounding the wooden beams above. Then, in hushed voices, they spoke of dreams for the future, of living in a distant village, of mornings spent together without fear, of a small home filled with laughter instead of rules. Luke took Eleanor's hand in both of his fingers warm despite the cold. "If we are discovered, I will take the blame," he promised, his voice trembling. "You must not suffer for loving me." Eleanor shook her head fiercely. "No, Luke, whatever comes, we face it together." Their words hung in the damp air, as sacred as any vow spoken before an altar. They knew these moments could not last forever. Every secret meeting increased the risk of exposure, and every stolen glance was another chance for fate to intervene. Yet, for now, the world outside faded into the background, leaving only the steady rhythm of their hearts and the soft lull of the river below. When the rain finally eased, they parted with one last, lingering embrace. Eleanor slipped back through the shadows, clutching the memory of Luke's touch like a precious jewel. As she entered her chamber, she caught her reflection in the dark glass of the window, her hair wild, cheeks flushed, eyes shining with both hope and fear. Somewhere beyond the stone walls, church bells tolled midnight, marking another day survived and another secret kept. In that quiet hour as the household slept, Eleanor whispered Luke's name into the darkness, letting it wrap around her like a shield against the uncertainties of tomorrow. Each night seemed to stretch longer, the air in the manor thick with both the scent of summer and the weight of unspoken truths. Eleanor struggled to keep her composure, afraid that even a small slip might reveal her secret. She smiled at her mother over morning bread, stitched neat lines into her embroidery, and listened quietly to the distant laughter of her younger siblings, all the while feeling a gentle ache in her chest whenever she thought of Luke. In the busy afternoons, she sometimes watched from her window as Luke worked in the fields. He moved with quiet strength, every motion purposeful, yet she could sense the subtle glances he cast toward the house, searching for a glimpse of her. Sometimes he left her tiny gifts, an acorn, a pressed flower, a feather tucked into the handle of a basket. Each token was a promise. "I am thinking of you." Sir Richard's vigilance only increased. He questioned Eleanor about her walks, her moods, even her appetite. One day he intercepted her on the way to the chapel, demanding to know why she wandered the orchard so often. Eleanor answered with practiced calm, claiming she sought solace among the trees to pray. But Richard's eyes narrowed. He warned her that the world outside their walls was not safe, and that the family's reputation was a fragile thing. Rumors, it seemed, traveled faster than the wind. In the kitchen, the maids whispered about strange footprints in the gardens, and the cook wondered aloud about a missing loaf of bread. Eleanor knew that every careless step could become the subject of gossip, and gossip, in a noble house, was as dangerous as any weapon. Still, the heart cannot be locked away forever. One evening, Eleanor received a message from Luke, hidden beneath a stone near the dovecote. He asked her to meet him at the edge of the woods, just as the first stars began to shimmer in the violet sky. The world seemed to hold its breath as she slipped through the shadows, her cloak wrapped tightly around her shoulders. Luke stood waiting beneath an ancient oak, his expression both hopeful and anxious. They spoke little, letting the silence settle around them like a protective veil. Eleanor pressed her palm against Luke's chest, feeling his heartbeat, steady and strong. He promised her that one day they would find a place where their love was not a secret, where they could build a life together without fear. She wanted to believe him, wanted to trust that there could be a world kinder than this. But even as she leaned into his embrace, Eleanor sensed the world closing in. Somewhere in the distance, a dog barked, and lights flickered in the manor's upper windows. The night felt fragile, every shadow hiding a threat. Still, as they parted, Eleanor held on to hope, refusing to let the darkness steal her dream. That night, sleep came slowly. She lay awake, replaying every moment, every word, every touch. She wondered how much longer they could keep their secret, how much longer love could hide in the spaces between fear and longing. Yet, as dawn crept over the fields and the first birds sang, Eleanor knew she would risk it all for even one more day with Luke. In the quiet morning, with the world just waking, hope still whispered her name. The days settled into a delicate routine, each moment carefully orchestrated to preserve the illusion of innocence. Eleanor became skilled at navigating the silent language of glances and gestures. She and Luke exchanged secret signs, a touch to the lips, a tilt of the head, a hand resting briefly on a stone wall, that spoke volumes to each other, though they went unnoticed by those around them. Every shared look was a promise, every missed opportunity, a silent ache. As the summer sun began to ripen the fields, the estate prepared for the arrival of distant relatives. The manor filled with new faces, laughter echoing in the halls, and the air grew thick with expectation. Eleanor's mother was preoccupied with arrangements, her mind on menus and seating charts, while Sir Richard prowled the corridors, more watchful than ever. The commotion made it harder for Eleanor and Luke to steal even a moment together. Their secret meetings became rarer, each one more precious for its rarity. One afternoon, as guests gathered in the great hall, Eleanor managed to slip away under the pretense of fetching a forgotten shawl. She hurried down a side passage, her heart thudding with excitement and dread, and found Luke waiting in the shadow of the old chapel. They had only minutes, but those minutes felt like lifetimes. Luke took her hands in his, rough and warm, and whispered his worries. "Eleanor, your brother suspects something. I see the way he looks at me. If he confronts me, I do not know what I'll say." Eleanor tried to reassure him, but her own voice trembled. "We must be careful, Luke. Just a little longer. Once the guests leave, things will calm." For a moment, they allowed themselves to dream of another place, another life, where love was not a crime. Luke spoke of a village by the sea, a tiny cottage with wild roses at the door, a world where no one cared about bloodlines or dowries. Eleanor closed her eyes and let herself imagine it, even if only for a heartbeat. Their moment was cut short by footsteps echoing on the flagstones. Eleanor slipped away, head down, her heart pounding, while Luke melted back into the shadows. She returned to the hall, face flushed, and was immediately drawn into a whirlwind of conversation and music. That night, as she lay in her bed, Eleanor replayed the meeting again and again. She thought of Luke's hands, his eyes full of hope and fear, and wondered how long they could keep up the charade. Outside, a storm was gathering. Thunder rumbled in the distance, and rain lashed the windows, mirroring the turmoil in her heart. As lightning illuminated the room, Eleanor made a silent vow. She would do whatever it took to protect their love, even if it meant lying to her family, even if it meant risking everything she had ever known. In the darkness, with the storm raging outside, Eleanor found a strange comfort in the thought that, somewhere on the estate, Luke was lying awake too, listening to the same thunder, dreaming the same dream. And so, another day ended, and their secret endured, hidden but unbroken, beneath the watchful eyes of the old manor and the endless summer sky. With the arrival of guests, every corridor and courtyard of the manor seemed alive with unfamiliar voices and hurried footsteps, making the estate feel at once festive and suffocating. Eleanor moved through her days in a haze, offering polite smiles and careful curtsies, but inside she was preoccupied with thoughts of Luke. The brief encounter in the chapel's shadow replayed in her mind each night as she lay awake, listening to the laughter from the distant halls. The presence of so many strangers added new risks to their secret, for gossip traveled swiftly among idle guests, and any careless glance or shared moment could unravel everything. Despite the danger, Eleanor and Luke found small ways to reassure each other. In the morning, Luke left a daisy on the windowsill outside the solar, Eleanor's favorite flower, its white petals trembling in the early breeze. She pressed it between the pages of her prayer book, carrying it as a token of hope. Meanwhile, Eleanor found herself paired with a distant cousin during evening walks in the gardens. Her arm looped through his while her thoughts drifted elsewhere. The cousin, a cheerful young man with a habit of quoting poetry, seemed harmless enough, but his presence made Luke's heart ache with jealousy each time he caught sight of them from afar. Luke knew his place. He was a servant, and she was a noblewoman, but the sight of her laughing, even politely, with another stirred something raw inside him. One evening, after a particularly long supper, Eleanor managed to slip away for a moment of solitude. She found herself in the orchard, the branches heavy with summer fruit and the grass cool beneath her feet. Luke was there, tending to a broken fence post, his face shadowed by the setting sun. They spoke only for a few moments, their words soft and urgent. "It is getting harder to wait," Luke confessed, his voice low. "I fear each day brings us closer to being found out." Eleanor touched his arm gently, offering what comfort she could. Soon the guests will leave. We will find a way." Their eyes met, and for a heartbeat, the world was just theirs. No guests, no family, no rules. But reality returned quickly, as distant voices called out in the fading light. Eleanor hurried back, cheeks flushed, and Luke disappeared into the gathering shadows. That night, as the manor quieted and a soft rain began to fall, Eleanor pressed her palm to the cold glass of her window, wishing she could step through to a life where she and Luke could walk openly together, hand in hand. As the storm passed and the world grew still, she whispered a prayer for courage, knowing that love like theirs would need every ounce of strength the future could demand. In the hush before dawn, hope flickered on, stubborn and bright, refusing to be extinguished by fear or circumstance, and promising that, even in the darkest times, love would find a way to survive. As the guests lingered, the manor was filled with ceaseless festivities, banquets that stretched late into the night, hunting parties at dawn, and endless games and music in between. Eleanor moved through it all like a ghost, her mind only half present, her heart always searching for Luke among the crowd. She saw him sometimes at a distance, tending horses or carrying supplies for the kitchens, his head bowed as he passed clusters of gossiping guests. Their worlds felt so close, and yet impossibly far apart. One afternoon, as a gentle breeze stirred the curtains in the drawing room, Eleanor found herself seated beside her cousin, who spoke enthusiastically of his travels in distant lands. She nodded politely, but her thoughts wandered, tracing every possible path that might lead her back to Luke. The noise and laughter of the house became a blur, and she longed for the quiet sanctuary of the orchard or the soft hush of the woods, where only Luke's voice mattered. Despite the chaos, Luke and Eleanor managed to arrange a secret meeting. The signal was a small blue ribbon, tied around the handle of the well, fluttering just enough to catch Eleanor's eye as she crossed the courtyard. She waited until dusk, her heart pounding, before slipping away under the pretense of retrieving a lost earring. Luke was waiting near the edge of the woods, his face lit by the last rays of the sun. They had little time, and the air between them was thick with longing and unspoken questions. "Do you still dream of our cottage by the sea?" Luke whispered, his hand trembling slightly as he reached for hers. Eleanor nodded, tears threatening in her eyes. "Every night," she replied. They stood close, the sounds of the manor fading into the background, and talked in soft, urgent voices. Luke confided his fears, his dread that her family might soon discover everything. Eleanor spoke of her own worries, her mother's probing questions, her brother's watchful presence, the sense that every shadow in the house now seemed to hide a secret. Yet, in that fleeting moment, all their doubts melted away, and they held each other in the soft, golden light, promising silently to be brave. When Eleanor returned to the house, she was met by Sir Richard, who eyed her damp hem and flushed cheeks with suspicion. He said nothing, but his silence was heavier than any accusation. That night Eleanor could barely eat, her nerves stretched thin. She waited until the house fell silent, then sat by her window, watching the stars wheel across the sky. Somewhere out there Luke was also awake, lying on his narrow cot, staring into the darkness and clinging to hope. As the festival drew to a close, the guests began to leave, their laughter and songs echoing through the halls one last time. Eleanor's mother began to speak again of marriage prospects, of alliances and duty. Each conversation felt like a cold wind blowing through Eleanor's heart, but she met every mention with polite agreement, never betraying her true feelings. She knew that as the house emptied and routine returned, the danger would remain, but so too would the stubborn, glowing ember of love. In the days that followed, Eleanor and Luke saw each other more often, their moments together charged with both relief and anxiety. The world was closing in, but their secret survived, growing stronger in the silence, promising that even in a world of rules and watchful eyes, love could carve out a space of its own, hidden yet unbreakable, bright as any summer sun. With the manor quieting once more, Eleanor felt a bittersweet relief settle over the estate. The absence of guests meant fewer prying eyes and a return to familiar rhythms. But it also brought the reality of her situation into sharper focus. Each day, her mother became more insistent on the subject of marriage, arranging meetings with suitors from neighboring lands and discussing dowries and alliances over supper. Eleanor listened quietly, her answers measured and careful, while inside she fought against the creeping dread that her fate might soon be sealed by a signature or a nod across a table. Luke, too, sensed the change. The pace of his work increased as the household resumed its daily business, but every quiet moment he could steal away was spent thinking of Eleanor. Their meetings, though more frequent, carried a new sense of urgency. They spoke in hushed tones near the edge of the woods, hearts racing as they dreamed of escape, both knowing that time was no longer their ally. One cool morning, Eleanor slipped away before dawn, following a narrow path through the dew-soaked grass. She found Luke waiting beneath a willow tree, his silhouette framed by the soft glow of sunrise. For a long moment, neither spoke. They simply stood together, drawing comfort from the steady rhythm of shared breath. Finally, Luke broke the silence, his voice husky with emotion. "I have saved some coins," he whispered. "Enough, perhaps, to carry us to the coast. There is a village there where no one knows our names. We could be free, Eleanor." The thought was intoxicating, and Eleanor's eyes filled with hope and fear in equal measure. "But what of my family?" she murmured, torn between duty and desire. Luke shook his head, his expression resolute. "Love is worth any price, Eleanor, even if it means starting over with nothing." As the sun rose higher, they embraced, each silently promising to be brave for the other. They agreed to meet again in 3 nights' time, at the old mill by the river, where they would decide their fate. The days that followed were a blur for Eleanor. Her mother pressed her to accept a proposal from a wealthy merchant's son, whose family would bring honor and fortune to their house. Sir Richard watched her more closely than ever, his suspicions barely concealed behind stiff manners. Eleanor found herself trapped in a delicate dance, feigning interest in a future she did not want, while secretly planning her escape. She memorized every detail of the estate, the creak of the garden gate, the time the guards changed shifts, the places where shadows lingered longest after sunset. She moved like a ghost, speaking little, holding the weight of her secret close. When the 3rd night finally arrived, Eleanor felt both terrified and exhilarated. She wrapped herself in a dark cloak and slipped out as the house slept, her heart hammering in her chest. At the river, Luke was waiting, his figure barely visible in the moonlight. Together, they whispered their plans, mapping out the journey they hoped would deliver them into a life of their own making. As they parted, Eleanor pressed her hand to Luke's cheek, her voice trembling as she promised, "No matter what happens, I will find you." With hope flickering like a candle in the dark, she made her way back through the silent estate, one step closer to the future they both dreamed of, and determined, no matter the cost, to choose love over fear. As the night deepened and Eleanor crept back into the manor, every sound seemed amplified. The quiet click of a latch, the sigh of old floorboards, the distant call of an owl outside her window. She held her breath with every step, knowing that discovery now would mean the end of all their hopes. Slipping beneath her blankets, she stared at the ceiling, her mind racing through every detail of the plan. Luke would wait for her at the edge of the woods at midnight 2 nights from now, with a small pack and the few coins he had managed to save. Together they would travel by foot under cover of darkness, following back roads to the coast. The thought both thrilled and terrified her, for she knew how dangerous the world outside the estate could be, especially for a young woman of noble birth. Yet fear could not outweigh the longing in her heart. The following days passed in a blur of tense anticipation. Eleanor's mother pressed her for a decision about the merchant's son, and Sir Richard's suspicion seemed to harden into certainty. He followed her movements with the intensity of a hawk watching prey, his words clipped and cold whenever they spoke. Eleanor feigned compliance, nodding through conversations about wedding fabrics and future homes, all the while memorizing escape routes and packing a small satchel of essentials: bread, a water flask, a scrap of ribbon from Luke, and her father's old compass. At night, she rehearsed her escape in her mind, every turn and hiding place etched into her memory. Luke, meanwhile, went about his duties with a calm exterior that belied his inner turmoil. He worked late in the stables and lingered near the kitchens, gathering food and supplies for their journey. When the household slept, he wrote Eleanor tiny notes, words of love and encouragement that she found in the most unexpected places, each one a lifeline pulling her through the days. The bond between them had become unbreakable, forged by secrecy and longing, tested by fear but never diminished. As the appointed night approached, Eleanor's heart beat with a mixture of hope and dread. She kissed her youngest sister on the forehead before bed, holding her close a moment longer than usual, and whispered a silent goodbye. The manor was hushed and shadowed, its ancient stones witness to secrets old and new. Eleanor waited until the clock struck midnight, then slipped silently from her bed, wrapped in her cloak, and made her way to the garden. The moon hung low and golden over the fields as she crossed the lawn, every step careful and measured. She reached the edge of the woods, her breath clouding in the cool night air, and there, half hidden in the shadows, stood Luke. Their eyes met, full of fear and fierce determination. Without a word, Luke took her hand, and together they plunged into the forest, following the narrow path that would lead them far from everything they had ever known. Behind them, the manor slept on, oblivious to the dreams taking flight beyond its walls. Ahead, the unknown beckoned, full of peril and promise. And in that fragile, moonlit silence, Eleanor and Luke clung to each other, their love shining brighter than any lantern, lighting the way into a future only they could imagine. The night air in the forest was cool and heavy, with the scent of pine and earth, each shadow shifting as the couple moved silently through the underbrush. Eleanor clutched Luke's hand, trusting his steady pace as they left the only world she had ever known behind. The path was uneven, roots and stones threatening to trip her at every step, but Luke's presence gave her courage. They spoke in whispers only when necessary, letting the music of the night, crickets, distant owls, the soft rush of a hidden stream, fill the spaces between them. Their journey was just beginning, but already the darkness felt different, alive with possibility rather than fear. They walked for hours, navigating by moonlight and Luke's careful sense of direction. He had traveled these woods before, delivering messages between nearby estates, and he led Eleanor with gentle confidence. Once, they paused by an ancient tree, its trunk twisted and gnarled, to rest and share a bit of bread and water. Eleanor, exhausted but exhilarated, leaned against Luke's shoulder, listening to the steady beat of his heart. For a fleeting moment, it felt as if the world had shrunk to just the two of them, a bubble of warmth and hope floating through the wild. As dawn crept across the horizon, painting the sky with streaks of pink and gold, Luke guided Eleanor to a small clearing where they could hide for the day. They tucked themselves beneath a thicket of brambles, wrapped in a borrowed blanket, and drifted into uneasy sleep as the first birds began to sing. Eleanor dreamed of distant shores and unfamiliar towns, her mind restless with the mix of freedom and fear. Luke, too, slept lightly, waking often to scan the woods for any sign of pursuit. Back at the manor, the household awoke to confusion and alarm. Eleanor's bed was empty, her cloak missing, and within hours the news spread through the halls like wildfire. Sir Richard led a frantic search of the grounds, his fury barely contained. The Baron and Baroness were stricken, their plans for Eleanor's future now shattered in a single night. Some whispered of kidnapping, others of witchcraft or ancient curses, but only a few servants guessed the truth. Those who had seen Eleanor's distant smiles or caught glimpses of Luke's longing looks. As the sun climbed higher, Eleanor and Luke remained hidden, waiting for nightfall before continuing their journey. They spoke little during the day, each lost in their own thoughts. Eleanor mourning the life she had left behind but clinging fiercely to hope, Luke worrying over the dangers that still lay ahead. When dusk finally returned, they set out once more, careful to avoid the main roads, moving steadily toward the coast. Their love, once a fragile secret in the shadows of the manor, now carried them forward into the unknown. Each step was an act of faith, every mile a testament to the strength of their bond. They did not know what awaited them at journey's end, but as long as they walked together, they felt braver than they ever had before. In the deepening twilight, their figures merged with the shadows, two souls bound by love and courage, venturing into a world that might at last offer them freedom. Night after night, Eleanor and Luke pressed onward, weaving through dense woods and across rolling fields, always moving by darkness and sleeping by day. Hunger and fatigue soon became familiar companions. They rationed their bread carefully and drank from icy streams, savoring each small comfort as if it were a feast. The stars above felt closer than ever, and sometimes, lying together under the vast sky, Eleanor whispered stories of her childhood to Luke, of festival days, hidden alcoves in the manor, and dreams she had never dared to speak aloud before. Luke listened intently, his arm around her shoulders, and told his own tales, of lost family, of hard winters survived, of hope he had nearly given up until the day he met her. The forest felt endless, a world of its own where time lost meaning, and though every rustle in the undergrowth made their hearts jump, the silence was also a comfort, sheltering them from the world they had fled. Days blurred into one another. Eleanor's shoes wore thin, and her dress, once finely embroidered, was now torn and streaked with mud. But she did not complain. grateful instead for each dawn that found them still together, still free. Luke's hands, so strong and capable, grew gentler each day as he tended to her blistered feet and soothed her worries. Their love, once a secret hidden among stone walls, became their shield and solace, stronger for every hardship they endured. Occasionally they glimpsed the distant lights of villages or heard the muffled bells of traveling merchants, but always they kept their distance, wary of strangers who might recognize Eleanor or report them to her family. Once, near a crossroads, they hid behind thick hedgerows as a party of mounted men thundered by. Eleanor's heart nearly stopped when she recognized the family crest embroidered on a rider's cloak. Luke pressed a finger to her lips, and they waited in breathless silence until the riders passed out of sight, the echo of hooves fading into the dusk. On the fifth night, Luke led Eleanor to the edge of a quiet hamlet where a small chapel stood, its doors open to the cool air and the flickering light of a single candle within. Exhausted and desperate for shelter, they crept inside, grateful for the sanctuary of ancient stone and hushed prayers. The kindly priest, an old man with clouded eyes, offered them bread and a safe place to rest without asking too many questions. For a few precious hours, they slept on a pallet near the altar, the gentle drone of evening prayers lulling them into a dreamless, healing sleep. When dawn broke, Eleanor thanked the priest with tears in her eyes, and Luke pressed a coin into his hand. They left quietly, hearts lighter for the kindness of a stranger, and continued on their journey. Each mile brought them closer to the coast and the hope of a new beginning. They clung to each other as the landscape changed, woods thinning to windswept meadows, the air growing salty and sharp with every step. In the soft light of morning, with the promise of freedom on the horizon, Eleanor and Luke pressed on, bound by a love that nothing, not even distance or fear, could break. With every passing day, the signs of their journey became more evident. Eleanor's hair, tangled by the wind, Luke's cloak stained from the rain, and the pair growing leaner from their careful rations. Yet, neither dwelled on discomfort. The thought of freedom was a constant ember that warmed them, even in the chill of early mornings. The countryside shifted as they neared the coast. The trees grew sparse, giving way to rolling hills dotted with grazing sheep and low stone fences. The sound of gulls sometimes echoed overhead, reminding them that the sea, and with it, a life beyond pursuit, was growing ever closer. In the evenings, as the sky turned gold and violet, Eleanor and Luke would find a hollow between rocks or a small copse to rest, sharing quiet words and watching the stars appear one by one. There was an intimacy in these moments, a peace that made the hardships bearable. On the seventh night, as a mist drifted in from the sea, they stumbled upon a tiny fishing village, its cottages clustered close together, their windows glowing with candlelight. Luke suggested they skirt the edge of the village, but Eleanor, weary and hungry, hesitated. "If we keep running, we will never rest," she murmured. "Let us find shelter, even if only for one night." Luke agreed, and they entered the village as quietly as shadows, hoods pulled low. A kindly widow, taking pity on the tired couple, welcomed them into her modest home. She asked no questions about their past, only offered warm soup and a soft bed beside the hearth. That night, as the fire crackled and the scent of the sea lingered on the air, Eleanor allowed herself to hope that their ordeal might soon be over. Luke, too, dared to imagine a future free from fear. They spoke softly of plans, finding work in a distant port, perhaps as servants or laborers, building a life where no one knew their names or cared for their lineage. The dreams they shared were simple: a room of their own, mornings spent together, the laughter of children echoing in the yard. But the world beyond the widow's cottage was not so easily escaped. In the early hours before dawn, a shout rang out in the village square. Strangers, asking about a young noblewoman in a stable hand, offering a reward for information. Luke and Eleanor's hearts pounded as they listened to the widow's gentle warning. "Go before it is too late," she urged, pressing a loaf of bread into Eleanor's hands and guiding them to the back door. Once more, they found themselves on the run, hearts racing as they slipped through narrow lanes and across moonlit fields. The taste of freedom was bittersweet. So close they could almost touch it, yet still just out of reach. As the first light of dawn colored the sky, they paused atop a grassy hill and looked down at the silver line of the sea, stretching wide and wild before them. Side by side, weary but unbroken, they clung to hope and pressed on, certain that as long as they faced the future together, no force on earth could turn them back. The sea was at last within reach, its distant roar a constant promise as Luke and Eleanor pressed onward, each step driven by the urgency of pursuit and the pull of their shared dream. The world around them seemed to grow larger and more untamed. Wind-carved cliffs loomed above winding paths, wildflowers nodded in the breeze, and seabirds wheeled in endless gray skies. They traveled mostly at dawn and dusk, hiding in thickets and under overhangs when the day was at its brightest, always alert to voices or movement on the roads behind them. Each time they heard a rider in the distance, or the shouts of travelers on the path, their hearts would freeze, and they would cling to the shadows, barely daring to breathe until the danger passed. On the 14th morning since leaving the manor, they reached a rocky outcrop that offered their first unobstructed view of the coastline. The sight left Eleanor breathless. A jagged stretch of cliffs falling away to a crescent of pale sand and churning blue-green water. For a moment they simply stood together, letting the wind tangle their hair and salt their skin, the enormity of what they had risked settling in their bones. Luke wrapped his arms around Eleanor, his voice thick with emotion. "We made it this far. We can make it the rest of the way." She smiled, the tension in her chest easing for the first time in weeks. Carefully, they descended toward a small harbor nestled between the cliffs, where fishing boats bobbed in the gentle surf and smoke curled from a cluster of weathered cottages. The town was sleepy and unremarkable, the kind of place where strangers rarely lingered, and questions were kept to a minimum. Luke asked after work at the docks and was quickly hired by a fisherman in need of strong hands. Eleanor, disguising her noble bearing with a borrowed kerchief and simple dress, offered to help mend nets and tend to the fishermen's children. For the first time, their days followed a rhythm not dictated by fear, but by honest labor and the tides of the sea. Though the threat of discovery never vanished entirely, the townsfolk accepted them as they were, two quiet souls grateful for shelter and purpose. In the evenings, as the sun set behind the cliffs and painted the sky in shades of coral and indigo, Luke and Eleanor would walk along the shore, hands entwined, talking softly of their journey and the life they hoped to build. They found peace in small things, the laughter of village children, the warmth of bread fresh from the oven, the gentle hush of the sea at night. Yet, Even as their new life began to take shape, a shadow lingered. Eleanor often glanced over her shoulder, haunted by the possibility that someone might recognize her, that a word sent back to the manor would bring all their dreams crashing down. Luke felt it too, the old weight of caution never entirely leaving his posture or his smile. But they refused to let fear rule them. They built a home from hope and hard work, trusting that even in a world built to keep them apart, love could carve out a haven as vast and enduring as the sea itself. The rhythm of life by the sea slowly wove its way into Luke and Eleanor's hearts, soothing their fears with each tide and sunrise. Days began before the sun, with Luke joining the fishermen as they cast their nets, his strong hands quickly earning him respect among the crew. Eleanor found herself welcomed by the village women, who taught her to bake bread, tend to scraped knees, and share laughter over simple meals. The salt air made her cheeks glow, and for the first time in her life, she felt truly alive. Her days shaped not by obligation, but by her own small joys and choices. In the quiet moments, Luke and Eleanor would sit on the rocks, feet dangling above the foam, watching the horizon and dreaming aloud of a future they could build together. They spoke of children with Eleanor's cleverness and Luke's steady hands, of a tiny house filled with music and the smell of fresh bread. The wounds of the past still lingered, but here they scabbed over slowly, healing under the gentle gaze of the sea. Each night, they returned to the same small cottage, a single room, its walls patched with driftwood and old sailcloth, but warm and safe. Yet, even in this newfound peace, old anxieties occasionally crept in. Eleanor sometimes startled at a knock on the door or the cry of a distant gull, fearing it might be the herald of pursuit. She would lie awake, listening to Luke's even breathing beside her, telling herself that they were safe now, that the manor was far behind them, and their secret was well kept. Luke sensed these worries and would hold her close, whispering reassurances until her heartbeat slowed and her dreams returned. Seasons began to turn. The village bustled with the work of summer, boats repaired, fish salted, and festivals celebrated under garlands of wildflowers. At the midsummer feast, Eleanor wore a crown woven from sea lavender, and Luke danced with her in the square beneath lanterns strung between the houses. For the first time, they allowed themselves to be seen as a couple, and though some villagers wondered about the stories they did not tell, none pressed for answers. Their happiness was quiet and contagious, drawing them into the tapestry of village life. But the past, like the tide, has a way of returning. One evening, as the sky darkened with a brewing storm, a stranger arrived in the harbor, a merchant with keen eyes, who watched Eleanor with curiosity. She felt his gaze linger, her old fear prickling beneath her skin. Luke noticed too, tightening his grip on her hand as they made their way home through the rising wind. That night, they spoke in low voices, weighing whether to stay or move on again, knowing that the peace they had found was fragile, easily shattered by the world they thought they had left behind. Still, they promised each other to face whatever came, together. As rain lashed their window and thunder rolled in from the sea, they held each other close, trusting that, as long as their love endured, they could weather any storm, no matter how fierce. The storm that battered the village that night seemed almost a sign, a reminder that even in moments of calm, uncertainty could return with little warning. Rain pounded on the cottage roof, and wind rattled the shutters, but inside, Luke and Eleanor sat close by the hearth, drawing comfort from each other's presence. The stranger's appearance had unsettled them both, and sleep came fitfully, haunted by dreams of pursuit and discovery. By morning, the tempest had blown itself out, leaving the world washed clean and the air sharp with the scent of salt and seaweed. Luke left early to help repair storm-damaged boats at the harbor, while Eleanor walked along the beach, searching for driftwood and letting the waves cool her restless thoughts. She noticed the stranger again, standing on the breakwater, his gaze fixed on the horizon. When he turned, their eyes met, just for a heartbeat, but enough to send a chill down her spine. She hurried back to the village, her mind spinning with questions. That afternoon, she confided in Luke, who listened quietly, his jaw set in determination. "We will not run unless we must," he promised. "We have built a life here. We deserve to hold on to it." Eleanor nodded, steeling herself against fear, drawing strength from Luke's calm resolve. The days passed slowly, the stranger's presence a shadow over every joy. He spoke little to the villagers but watched everything with sharp attention, as if piecing together a puzzle only he understood. Once Eleanor saw him studying her as she tended a child's scraped knee, and another time he lingered near the cottage as Luke mended nets by the door. Rumors began to ripple through the village. Was he a merchant, a sailor, or perhaps a messenger from somewhere far away? Despite their unease, Luke and Eleanor continued their routines, determined not to let suspicion poison their happiness. They worked side by side, laughing with friends, taking comfort in the rhythm of daily chores and the beauty of summer evenings by the shore. Yet each night, as darkness settled and the lanterns flickered low, they lay awake whispering plans. What to do if questions were asked? Where to go if the stranger turned out to be a threat? One sunset, as they walked the tide line together, Luke paused and took Eleanor's hands in his. "No matter what happens, I will protect you," he vowed. "If we must leave, we will do so together. Our love is stronger than any fear." Eleanor blinked away tears, realizing that her courage had grown, not from the absence of danger, but from the certainty of Luke's devotion. In the days that followed, the stranger began to spend more time with the villagers, buying goods and trading stories. His manner softened, and it became clear he was simply passing through, drawn by the same hospitality and peace that had welcomed Luke and Eleanor. When he finally departed, leaving behind a sack of rare spices and a smile for the widow who had housed him, relief washed over the young couple. Their secret, for now, remained safe, and as the nights grew warmer, hope returned, shining brighter than ever beneath the watchful stars. With the stranger gone and the village once more at peace, Luke and Eleanor allowed themselves to exhale fully, feeling the tightness in their chests finally begin to ease. Summer deepened, painting the fields and cliffs with wildflowers, and the days stretched long and golden, filled with a sense of freedom they had never truly known before. Luke spent more hours on the water, learning the ways of the sea from weathered fishermen who treated him like a son. Eleanor became a beloved figure among the villagers, her gentle touch and quiet wisdom sought by mothers, children, and elders alike. The cottage grew richer with each season, herbs drying from the rafters, shells and bits of sea glass lining the windowsills, laughter and music drifting out on the evening breeze. At night, they would walk the empty shore, barefoot in the cool sand, their fingers intertwined. The world felt both wide and close, as if they had finally carved out a secret corner of happiness for themselves. Luke sometimes caught Eleanor gazing at the horizon, her eyes full of hope and a quiet kind of triumph. Do you regret any of it? He asked her one evening as the sun slipped behind the waves. Eleanor shook her head, smiling softly. No, Luke. I have never truly lived until now. They made new friends. A shy orphan girl who spent her days combing the beach for treasures, an elderly man who remembered every storm and every shipwreck along the coast. Their home became a gathering place for stories and shared meals, and the sense of community wrapped around them like a second skin. In the peace they found, wounds of the past slowly faded, replaced by gratitude for the simple joys of everyday life. Yet, they never forgot how fragile happiness could be. The memory of their flight, the danger, the fear, the cold nights on the run, reminded them to cherish every moment together. One late summer evening, as a lantern swung above the door and music spilled from the village square, Luke and Eleanor danced together beneath the stars. The villagers clapped and cheered, raising mugs of cider in their honor, and in that joyful chaos, it was easy to believe their troubles were finally behind them. Eleanor rested her head on Luke's shoulder, and he pressed a kiss to her hair, promising silently to protect this happiness with all that he was. As the night deepened, they wandered back to their cottage, the path lit by moonlight and the songs of distant owls. Inside, Eleanor sat by the window listening to the soft crash of the waves, Luke's arms wrapped around her. She knew tomorrow would bring new challenges, as life always did, but she was certain now that love, once forbidden, once hidden, had found its place in the open, no longer just a secret in the shadows, but a story alive in every heartbeat, every whispered promise, every shared dawn by the endless sea. As autumn crept over the village, the days shortened, and the air turned brisk, tinged with the scent of wood smoke and salt. Luke and Eleanor watched the changing seasons from their cottage window, bundled together beneath a patchwork quilt, content in the warmth they had created. The sea was wilder now, tossing white-capped waves against the rocks, and the fishermen spoke of storms to come, preparing their boats with sturdy ropes and prayers for safe return. Eleanor loved these dusky evenings, when lamplight flickered on the walls, and she could feel Luke's heartbeat steady beneath her cheek. The village, too, seemed to grow closer as the cold set in, neighbors sharing stews and stories, helping one another prepare for winter's trials. Despite the peace they had found, there were moments when the past reached out with icy fingers. Sometimes, a letter would arrive from a distant town, bringing rumors of unrest or reminders of old debts. Or a peddler passing through would glance twice at Eleanor's face, perhaps struck by her beauty, or by some fleeting resemblance to a lady he'd once glimpsed in a grander place. On such days Luke was more vigilant, keeping his knife close and his words few, but nothing ever came of these passing threats. Time and distance had softened the urgency of their flight, and it became easier to believe that the world had finally forgotten. Work was hard but honest. Luke learned the art of repairing nets and mending sails, his hands calloused but sure. Eleanor found her own rhythm, teaching children their letters, nursing the sick, and helping to gather wild herbs from the wind-bent cliffs. They saved what little they could, and together dreamed of one day buying a small plot of land further up the coast, a patch of earth to call their own, sheltered from the storms and safe from the reach of old names and titles. On market days they walked into the heart of the village, arm in arm, welcomed as if they had always belonged. The orphan girl they'd befriended often trailed after them, clutching Eleanor's hand, and chattering about her plans for the future. In these simple routines, Eleanor found a peace she had never known at the manor, a sense of being seen and valued for who she was, not for the lineage stamped into her name. One crisp evening, as the first stars blinked into the twilight sky, Luke stood beside Eleanor outside their cottage and watched the lights of fishing boats bobbing on the horizon. "We have come so far," he murmured, "and yet, each day with you feels like a new beginning." Eleanor squeezed his hand, her eyes shining. "That is what love does," she replied. "It builds a life, piece by piece, until you find you are home." And as the wind carried the promise of another long winter, Luke and Eleanor drew strength from each other, grateful for the quiet miracle of a love that had survived so much and blossomed, at last, into a life all their own. Winter descended slowly on the little village, draping the rooftops with frost and turning the fields brittle and silver under the pale sun. The sea roared louder now, waves hurling themselves against the rocks as icy winds whipped along the coast. Luke rose early each morning, his breath clouding in the chill, to help the fishermen haul their boats ashore before the storms grew too fierce. Eleanor tended to hearth and home, gathering driftwood, mending warm clothes, and filling their cottage with the scent of stews and spiced bread. The cold outside only made the warmth within their four walls more precious, each evening spent together a quiet celebration of survival and love. Yet, even as the world outside turned harsher, inside, a gentle happiness grew. The villagers looked out for one another, sharing firewood, swapping preserves, bringing laughter and comfort to even the darkest nights. Eleanor and Luke joined these traditions wholeheartedly, helping to care for the frail and sitting up with neighbors whose loved ones were late from sea. The orphan girl, now a fixture in their home, brought wildflowers to decorate the table, her laughter a bright thread in the tapestry of their days. But winter's silence also offered space for memory and reflection. Some nights, as the wind howled and rain battered the window panes, Eleanor lay awake beside Luke, tracing the journey that had led them here. She remembered the manor's cold grandeur, the echo of her footsteps in empty halls, the suffocating weight of expectation. The pain of leaving had not vanished. She sometimes missed her sister's laughter, the softness of fine linens, the safety that came with belonging to a name. But when she watched Luke's sleeping face in the firelight, or listened to the gentle rise and fall of his breath, she knew she had chosen the right path. Luke, too, thought often of the past, of the risks they had taken, and the life they had left behind. He was grateful for the peace of the present, for the dignity found in honest work, and the acceptance he had earned in the village. Still, there were moments when a familiar fear crept in, when a stranger paused too long in conversation, or a boat from another town docked unexpectedly at the harbor. Luke would watch and wait, always ready to protect the life they had built together. As the year drew to its end, the village gathered to mark the winter solstice, a festival of light to drive away the longest night. Lanterns floated out to sea, carrying wishes for the coming year, and music and laughter spilled into every home. Luke and Eleanor stood arm in arm on the shore, the cold forgotten, their faces aglow with hope and gratitude. They had endured storms, both real and imagined, and emerged stronger, bound not just by love, but by the shared courage that had brought them, step by difficult step, to a home of their own making. As the lanterns drifted into the darkness, they made a silent vow to cherish this hard-won happiness, knowing that whatever storms might still come, they would face them together, side by side. As the harshest weeks of winter settled over the village, routines slowed, and every day became an exercise in patience and endurance. The fishermen mended nets by the fire, children skated on frozen ponds, and Eleanor shared stories with the orphan girl as snow drifted against the cottage door. Some days the wind was so fierce that it rattled the window panes for hours, and all the village seemed to do was huddle around stoves and wait for the thaw. Yet, inside their small home, Eleanor and Luke found comfort in each other and the community they had embraced. Their evenings were filled with quiet rituals. Luke brushing the snow from Eleanor's hair after she returned from the market, Eleanor wrapping Luke's hands in thick wool when he came in from the cold, laughter bubbling up as they shared a meal or a secret look across the room. In these moments, the old ache of exile faded, replaced by a sense of deep belonging. Still, the memory of their flight sometimes crept in, triggered by the crackle of frost or the distant toll of a bell. Luke would remember the long nights in the forest, the fear that had haunted every step, and he would draw Eleanor closer, needing the reassurance of her warmth. Eleanor, too, sometimes woke before dawn, haunted by dreams of stone corridors and stern faces, the world of her birth now as distant as a faded tapestry. But each morning, when she opened her eyes to the gentle rhythm of waves and Luke's smile, she knew the price of freedom had been worth it. The village marked the passing of time with small joys, a feast when the first lambs were born, a gathering for the full moon, dances that spilled from the square to the shore. Eleanor found herself swept up in the life of the community, her talents valued, and her kindness repaid in 100 small ways. She taught reading to children by lamplight, brewed healing teas for those ailing from winter chills, and became a trusted friend to neighbors who once might have eyed her as an outsider. Luke's reputation as a reliable and generous worker spread as well, and offers of help or a place at the table were never far away. One afternoon, as snowflakes danced in the gray light, the orphan girl pressed a clumsy bouquet of evergreens into Eleanor's hands. "For luck," she whispered, her eyes bright. "So you and Luke will always be together." Eleanor hugged her close, touched by the innocence and hope in the child's gesture. As the thaw finally came and the earth softened, Luke and Eleanor stood outside their cottage hand in hand, watching the first green shoots push bravely through the melting snow. It was a new season, a new beginning, one earned through courage and sacrifice. Their journey, marked by hardship and uncertainty, had led them to this gentle place, and as spring sunlight warmed their faces, they understood that the truest kind of home was not built of stone or blood, but of the love and loyalty they shared, unbreakable as the turning tide. Spring brought a sense of renewal to the village, awakening every field and hedgerow with the vibrant promise of new life. Luke rose with the sun, his hands busy with planting and repairing, his spirit lighter as the days grew warmer and longer. Eleanor reveled in the return of color, the first bluebells beneath the trees, the blush of blossoms on the wild cherry branches. She walked barefoot in the grass, laughing with the orphan girl and helping to weave garlands for the village's spring festival. With each day, the memory of flight faded further, replaced by the gentle certainty of belonging. Their cottage became a center of celebration. Neighbors gathered to share meals on mild evenings, stories and songs echoing long after dark. Eleanor's simple meals, herbed bread, wild greens, honeyed apples, became beloved, her table always open to a hungry child or weary traveler. Luke's strong arms and steady manner won him respect, and with each passing week, the circle of friends around them grew. One golden afternoon, Luke and Eleanor joined the village in decorating the square for the spring festival. Lanterns hung from every tree, and a maypole stood at the center, ribbons fluttering in the breeze. Children darted between stalls, faces streaked with berry juice, while elders exchanged news and laughter. Eleanor felt a peace she had never known in her former life, watching Luke lift the orphan girl high so she could tie her ribbon to the tallest branch. As evening approached, music filled the air and the villagers joined hands in a circle, dancing beneath the stars. Luke twirled Eleanor around the fire, her laughter ringing out as he spun her, and for a moment it seemed the world contained only joy. When the dancing faded and the crowd drifted away, Luke led Eleanor to a quiet corner of the meadow. There, under a sky ablaze with stars, he knelt and offered her a simple silver ring he had fashioned from a coin, their past now far behind them, their future forged by their own hands. Tears glimmered in Eleanor's eyes as she accepted the ring, and they sealed their vow with a kiss, the applause of distant owls and the whisper of grass their only witnesses. They returned to their cottage arm in arm, the orphan girl skipping ahead, her laughter a melody of hope. That night, as they lay side by side, Eleanor traced the ring on her finger, feeling the weight of love and freedom intertwined. In the months that followed, the rhythm of their life settled deeper, each day a quiet celebration of all they had survived and all they had built. News from the wider world rarely reached them now, and when it did, it seemed more dream than threat, a reminder of the distance they had traveled, not just across the land, but from the burdens of their former lives. The bonds of the past, once chains, had faded into gentle memories, lessons carried forward but no longer wounds. As spring ripened into summer, Luke and Eleanor stood at the threshold of their cottage, gazing at the fields in bloom, hearts full and strong, ready to meet whatever the future might bring, together. Summer blossomed in all its glory, bathing the village and coast in warm light and filling the air with the sense of salt, grass, and ripening fruit. The rhythms of work and rest grew even gentler, boats gliding in early with the day's catch, children running barefoot through the surf, and the laughter of neighbors drifting up from shared tables. Luke and Eleanor felt the weight of old fears melt away, replaced by the sweet exhaustion of honest labor and the deep pleasure of belonging. Luke rose early to join the fishermen, returning in the afternoon with stories and a basket of silver fish. Eleanor tended their thriving garden, her hands skilled at coaxing herbs and vegetables from the earth, and she was often found teaching the village children songs or games in the shade of the old willow tree. The orphan girl, no longer shy, had grown bold and joyful, forever darting between Luke and Eleanor with news of her discoveries: a new shell, a bird's nest, a secret trail through the dunes. One sultry evening, as the sun dipped low and the sky glowed orange, the village gathered for a midsummer feast. Tables were laden with bread and roasted lamb, honey cakes and jugs of cool cider. Lanterns flickered along the shore, and music from fiddles and flutes beckoned everyone to dance. Luke and Eleanor moved among their friends, sharing laughter and stories, feeling more a part of the village than ever before. When the moon climbed high, they stole away for a walk along the beach, the tide cool on their ankles, the world hushed except for the soft rush of waves. In that quiet, Luke spoke of dreams for the future, maybe a boat of his own, a patch of land to farm, perhaps even children to fill their home with laughter and light. Eleanor listened, her heart full, and answered with hopes of her own, that the orphan girl would grow up knowing she was loved, that the peace they'd found here would never fade, and that their story, once marked by secrecy and fear, would be remembered for its courage and the life they had built together. The days passed in a blur of color and contentment, but life's hardships had not vanished entirely. Storms still lashed the coast, and hard seasons came and went, but Luke and Eleanor faced every challenge together. Their bond, tested by trials, had become a beacon for others, proof that even in a world ruled by tradition and suspicion, love could change the course of a life. Sometimes, at dusk, Eleanor would sit on the cottage steps and watch the first stars appear, her heart sending silent gratitude for every twist of fate that had led her here. Luke would join her, his arm warm around her shoulders, and together they would watch the tide, knowing that whatever storms or blessings the future brought, they would face it side by side, forever anchored to the small, sturdy world they had chosen and made their own. As the days stretched toward late summer, the fields around the village ripened to gold, and the air took on the first hint of coming harvest. Luke and Eleanor found joy in every small ritual, collecting wild blackberries along the hedgerows, mending sails with friends as laughter echoed over the sand, watching the orphan girl run with the other children, her cheeks rosy with sun and freedom. The sense of belonging grew ever deeper, twining itself around their hearts and their home, so that even the occasional memory of fear seemed only a shadow in the light of their new life. Eleanor's days were filled with the rhythms of the village, from sunrise baking to dusk-time songs around a fire. Her voice, once timid and cautious, grew confident as she taught the children games and stories, and her gentle wisdom made her a friend to many. Luke, meanwhile, had earned the respect of even the oldest fishermen, and his laughter, rare in the early days, now rang out as freely as any man's on the coast. Together they had created something that felt unbreakable, a haven of their own making. Harvest season arrived in a blaze of activity. Every hand turned to gathering, preserving, and celebrating the earth's bounty. The village square filled with the scent of fresh bread and cider, and at night, torches blazed as neighbors danced in gratitude for another year of survival and joy. At the festival's height, Luke and Eleanor were asked to lead the opening dance, their story now woven into the village's own legend, a tale of courage, of two souls who defied fate for love and built a life from hope and grit. The orphan girl watched them with shining eyes, her small hands clapping in time with the music, her laughter joining that of the crowd. There were still quiet moments, too, when Eleanor would wander the cliffs at dawn, the wind tangling her hair as she looked out over the endless sea. She thought sometimes of her sisters, wondered if they were happy, if they ever thought of her, and sent silent prayers into the morning light for the family she had left behind. The pain of separation was real, but the fullness of her present life outweighed it, a gentle ache rather than a wound. Luke, too, reflected on all they had endured, grateful each night for Eleanor's presence beside him, for the trust and devotion that had made every hardship worthwhile. One evening, as they sat with friends around a bonfire, a wandering storyteller arrived in the village. He spun tales of distant lands, of daring escapes, and unexpected love, his words drifting up into the starlit sky. When he finished, the villagers called for Luke and Eleanor's own story, and blushing, Eleanor spoke of their journey. The fear and danger, yes, but most of all the kindness they had found and the life they had built together, stronger for every trial. As the fire burned low and the village settled into sleep, Luke and Eleanor lay side by side beneath their quilt, the orphan girl snuggled close. The harvest moon cast gentle light over the cottage, blessing the peace that had finally found them. In the hush before sleep, Eleanor whispered a promise to cherish this life, this love, and the family they had become, for all her days, no matter what seasons or storms might come. Autumn slowly painted the village in deep reds and burnished gold, leaves swirling in the cool wind, and days growing shorter with each passing week. The sea, once a mirror of blue, now tossed gray and wild beneath heavy skies. Luke and Eleanor busied themselves preparing for the colder months, stacking wood, preserving fruit, and checking the cottage roof for leaks. The orphan girl helped gather windfall apples, her hands sticky with juice, her laughter bright even on the darkest mornings. The pace of life slowed as the world turned inward, and evenings grew longer, spent by the hearth with stories and gentle music, the comforting tap of rain on the window their only accompaniment. With harvest behind them, the village shifted to a rhythm of rest and reflection. Luke spent time repairing nets and lending his strength to neighbors in need, while Eleanor taught the children new songs and helped the elders brew remedies for winter's ailments. There was a sense of contentment in the air, a satisfaction born of hard work and shared purpose, and the knowledge that whatever storms might come, they would face them together. Yet sometimes, when the wind howled through the thatch or the gulls called restlessly at dawn, Eleanor's thoughts wandered back to her childhood. Grand halls and silent corridors, the sound of distant bells, the dreams she once held of a different life. She wondered what her family might think if they could see her now, sleeves rolled up, laughter in her eyes, her heart so full it sometimes ached. Would they understand the choices she had made, or only see the distance that had grown between them? Luke sensed these moods and would sit beside her, silent and steady, holding her hand as the fire flickered low. He, too, carried memories of lost brothers, old regrets, the hunger that had once shaped every decision. But together, they had learned to turn sorrow into strength and memory into gratitude. The orphan girl, ever watchful, would sometimes crawl into Eleanor's lap on such evenings, tucking her head beneath Eleanor's chin and whispering, "We're safe now, aren't we?" Eleanor would hold her close, feeling the simple, fierce truth of that question, and answer softly, "Yes, we are safe. We are together." One crisp afternoon, the villagers gathered for the apple festival, filling the square with music, laughter, and the sweet scent of cider. Luke carved wooden animals for the children, and Eleanor entered a pie in the contest, her creation praised by all. As the sun set and lanterns lit the night, the village sang songs of hope and memory, their voices carrying far into the darkness. Later, as Luke, Eleanor, and the orphan girl walked home under the stars, their arms linked against the cold, they knew that whatever the future held, their love had weathered the hardest seasons. In the heart of autumn, surrounded by friends and the promise of home, they found peace, a quiet, enduring happiness built not on grand gestures, but on 1,000 simple acts of care and kindness, stitched together like the patchwork quilt, warming them through the night. As autumn slipped slowly into winter, frost crept along the edges of the village's thatched roofs, and the first snow dusted the ground in a quiet hush. The sea raged wilder, sending cold spray high against the cliffs, while the fields, once lush with grain and wildflowers, now slept beneath a silvery veil. Luke and Eleanor grew accustomed to the early darkness, lighting lanterns as soon as the sun began to dip, and savoring the simple routines that gave shape to their days. Mornings were spent huddled by the fire with mugs of warm broth. The orphan girl curled contentedly in a pile of blankets as Eleanor read aloud from a tattered book of fables. Luke checked the nets and boats each day, mending what was needed, his breath curling in the crisp air. The village became even more tightly knit as the world narrowed with the cold. Neighbors shared preserves and salted fish, and no one was ever left to face the longest nights alone. Eleanor helped deliver wood to those who were ill, and Luke joined others in shoveling snow from cottage roofs before it could grow heavy enough to threaten collapse. In the evenings, the three of them would sit by the fire, the orphan girl's head resting in Eleanor's lap as Luke carved tiny animals from scraps of driftwood, his hands sure and gentle in the glow. The old fears and memories still visited sometimes, as wind howled and shadows moved in the corners of the cottage. But they felt softer now, dulled by time and softened by the unbroken chain of peaceful days. Eleanor still dreamed of her family, wondering if her sisters had married, if her mother ever looked for her in the faces of passing strangers. There was a pang of longing, but also a deep gratitude for the life she had chosen. She had found something here that she never could have known in her childhood world of rules and expectations, a sense of belonging, earned and shared, that no distance could erase. One bitter night, as a storm swept in from the sea, a traveler knocked at their door, shivering and lost. Luke and Eleanor welcomed him in without question, drying his clothes by the fire and sharing what food they had. The traveler told stories of distant towns, and in return, Eleanor shared her own story, not of noble birth or forbidden love, but of a new family made in a place far from where she'd begun. The orphan girl listened wide-eyed, comforted by the knowledge that homes could be made anywhere. Hearts were kind and brave. When the storm passed, the traveler went on his way, leaving behind a carved wooden charm as thanks. Eleanor hung it over the hearth, a reminder of the open door that had once saved her and Luke. As winter deepened, they cherished these moments. The warmth of a shared meal, the safety of familiar arms, the gentle certainty that together they could weather any storm. And so, another season turned, their story stitched ever deeper into the fabric of the village, their love a quiet beacon through even the longest, coldest nights. The heart of winter brought both challenge and comfort to the village, snow lying thick on the paths, and the world shrinking to the soft golden glow of firelight through frosted panes. Days were short and labor slow, but Luke and Eleanor found contentment in the rhythms of the season, splitting wood together, tending the hearth, and finding joy in the simple acts of caring for one another. The orphan girl was quick to spot animal tracks in the snow, her cheeks pink from the cold, her laughter a small sunbeam on the grayest mornings. With the world outside so cold and fierce, their cottage became a true sanctuary, filled with the gentle sounds of quiet conversation, the crackle of flames, and the scent of spice bread cooling on the window ledge. Eleanor spent long hours teaching the children who gathered at their door, telling stories of far-off lands and reading from the precious few books the village owned. Her voice, steady and warm, soothed not only the little ones, but also the hearts of mothers and fathers who remembered winters of hardship before she and Luke arrived. Luke, meanwhile, worked alongside the other men, repairing nets, carving sleds for the children, and helping to dig out the cottages of neighbors when drifts grew high. The village moved as one body through the harshest months, sharing what they had, facing hardship with unity and good humor. Some nights, when the wind howled around the corners of the cottage and the moon cast blue shadows over the snow, Eleanor would sit in quiet reflection, the orphan girl's head in her lap and Luke by her side. She thought of the long journey that had brought them here, of all the roads she and Luke had walked, hand in hand, and how far they had come from the frightened fugitives who once slipped through the woods in terror. The memory of danger remained, a faint echo, a lesson that sharpened her gratitude for each safe, ordinary day. One evening, as the village gathered for a midwinter feast, Luke was asked to tell the story of their journey. Standing with Eleanor and the orphan girl beside him, he spoke softly but clearly, his words a tribute to courage, hope, and the kindness of strangers. He did not dwell on sorrow or loss, but instead on the strength that grows from love and the joy found in simple things, a warm hearth, a friend's embrace, the promise of tomorrow. As candles flickered and laughter filled the hall, Eleanor felt her heart swell with happiness. The past had shaped them, but it no longer defined their lives. Here, in a small cottage by the restless sea, surrounded by friends and family of their own choosing, they had found what so many in their old world still searched for, not just survival, but true belonging. When the night ended and they walked home beneath a sky scattered with stars, Eleanor knew that no matter what winters lay ahead, she and Luke would always have each other, and that their love, once forbidden, now quietly celebrated, would endure, as steady and bright as the lanterns shining in every window on that cold, beautiful night. As the first hints of spring appeared, tiny green shoots along the path, the chatter of birds returning to the hedgerows, the village began to stir from winter's slow embrace. Luke and Eleanor woke earlier with each lengthening day, eager to greet the sun and resume their work in the fields and gardens. The orphan girl, now a little older and taller, dashed outside at dawn to search for the season's first flowers, her pockets full of treasures by breakfast. The cold that had once driven everyone indoors gave way to open doors and laughter, drifting on the breeze, the promise of another year alive in every growing thing. Eleanor busied herself preparing the cottage for spring, sweeping out the last of the hearth's ashes, airing linens, and tending to the herbs that had survived on the windowsill. Luke joined neighbors in mending fences, readying boats for the sea, and sharing a renewed sense of hope and purpose. Their home became a hub of activity, with friends stopping by to exchange news, borrow tools, or simply sit in the warmth of good company. With the return of sunlight and color, memories of the long, dark journey that had brought them here softened, receding into the gentle rhythm of their days. Eleanor found herself thinking often of the past, not with fear or regret, but with a quiet gratitude for all that had been overcome. She remembered the terror and longing that once ruled her nights, and marveled at the peace that now filled her heart. Luke, too, reflected on the life they had built together, the little triumphs that had carried them from desperation to contentment. One afternoon, the village gathered for the first festival of the year, celebrating the return of light with music, dancing, and tables laden with food. Luke and Eleanor led the procession to the green, the orphan girl carrying a garland of wildflowers and the children laughing around her. There was a sense of joy and abundance that felt almost miraculous, and as they joined hands with their friends beneath the blossoming trees, it was easy to believe that the old wounds of exile and loss had healed at last. As evening fell and lanterns lit the square, Luke pulled Eleanor aside, away from the crowd. "Look how far we've come," he whispered, his eyes shining. "Do you remember when we thought we might never find peace?" Eleanor smiled, her heart full, and squeezed his hand. "We were searching for a home, Luke, but we found something better, a life." They walked back to their cottage beneath a sky ablaze with stars, the orphan girl skipping ahead, her laughter mingling with the songs of crickets and the distant rush of the sea. Inside, as they settled for the night, Eleanor felt the deep, steady hum of contentment, the rare and precious gift of love that had survived, endured, and flourished, growing stronger with every season, every sunrise, every quiet, ordinary day shared side by side. Spring's full awakening brought bursts of color to the village. The orchard trees shimmered with blossom, the meadows blazed with wildflowers, and sunlight poured in through cottage windows like gold. Luke and Eleanor, along with the orphan girl, spent their days outdoors, tending the small garden and coaxing vegetables and herbs from the warming earth. The villagers shared cuttings and seeds, advice and laughter, their hands busy as they prepared for the summer's plenty. There was a sense of abundance in every breath, and in this gentle routine, Luke and Eleanor found a happiness that felt both new and deeply earned. As the world greened and grew, Eleanor often reflected on the strange, winding journey that had led her here, from grand halls and hushed corridors to open fields and a simple cottage by the sea. Sometimes, while digging in the soft earth, she thought of her sisters' voices echoing in distant memories, of the rules and rituals she had once lived by, and of the longing that had driven her into the unknown. The ache of missing her old life was still there, a tender bruise, but it was softened now by gratitude, for Luke's steadfast love, for the orphan girl's laughter, and for the belonging she had found among these neighbors and friends. The village thrived as the days grew longer. Children's voices rang across the fields. Men returned each evening with nets full of fish, and women sang as they hung linens in the sun. The orphan girl learned to bake bread and gather eggs, proudly showing off her small triumphs to Luke and Eleanor, who encouraged her with every step. Together, the three of them formed a family in every sense, their days woven together with small rituals, kindness, and the kind of trust that comes only from surviving hardship together. One market day, as the square bustled with traders and storytellers, a traveling musician played a song that stirred old memories in Eleanor's heart. The melody was one she had learned as a child, a lullaby her mother used to sing. For a moment, she stood frozen in the crowd, eyes prickling with tears. Then Luke was at her side, his arm steady and comforting. "What is it?" he whispered. Eleanor shook her head, smiling through her tears. "Just a song I thought I'd forgotten. I never knew I would hear it here." Later, as they walked home under the golden light, Eleanor told Luke and the orphan girl stories of her childhood, of the garden she once played in, of her favorite hiding places, of the dreams that filled her heart long before she met Luke. The orphan girl listened, wide-eyed and fascinated, and Luke squeezed Eleanor's hand, honoring the courage it took to share those memories. That night, as they drifted into sleep, Eleanor felt a sense of wholeness she had never known before, a life shaped by both loss and love, by longing and fulfillment, by the hard choices that had led her here, and the blessings that now surrounded her. She understood at last that home was not a place but a journey, and that the greatest happiness was found in the shared work of building something lasting from all the broken and beautiful pieces of the past. Summer unfolded in a slow golden haze, days stretching luxuriously long, as the village basked beneath cloudless skies and the sea shimmered bright with sunlight. Luke and Eleanor relished every moment, their lives marked by a quiet abundance, the garden bursting with beans and peas, the orchard heavy with fruit, and neighbors dropping by with baskets of berries or fresh-caught fish. The orphan girl spent her hours chasing butterflies, braiding flower crowns, and learning the names of every bird that visited their windowsill. The simple joys of the season bound the three together in ways that felt both effortless and profound. Eleanor became known in the village for her kindness and her skill at soothing all manner of hurts, from a child's scraped knee to an elder's aching joints. Her gentle wisdom was sought by many, and her laughter was a familiar music in the square. Luke, meanwhile, proved himself an indispensable friend and worker, always first to lend a hand with heavy lifting, repairs, or the launching of boats. Their home, once a humble refuge, now buzzed with the comings and goings of friends and neighbors. Stories and songs traded over supper, laughter echoing late into the night. As the village prepared for the summer solstice, excitement built with each passing day. Garlands and ribbons appeared on doors and fences, and the air was sweet with the promise of celebration. On the night of the festival, bonfires blazed high, and the entire community gathered on the shore to dance, sing, and share a feast beneath the stars. Eleanor wore a dress of blue linen, her hair woven with wildflowers by the orphan girl, and Luke could not take his eyes from her all evening. As midnight approached, the villagers joined hands in a great circle around the fire, singing songs of the turning year and making wishes for the months ahead. Luke and Eleanor stood together, the orphan girl nestled between them, and in that circle of warmth and light, they felt as if every sorrow and fear had finally been burned away. Eleanor closed her eyes, making a silent wish, not for riches or recognition, but for the courage to cherish what they had built, and for the strength to weather whatever storms might yet come. The days that followed were filled with peace and gratitude. Eleanor and Luke took the orphan girl to the cliffs to watch the sunrise, shared quiet evenings in the garden, and told stories of their journey to anyone who asked. Their hearts, once battered by fear and longing, now beat in perfect harmony with the rhythms of the land and the love that held them together. As summer waned, the first hints of autumn crept in, a cool breeze at dawn, a golden cast to the late afternoon sun. But Luke and Eleanor welcomed the changing season with open arms, trusting that whatever hardships or joys lay ahead, they had already learned the most important lesson, that the true riches of life were found not in safety or status, but in the courage to choose love, again and again, every single day. As the sun dipped lower with each passing week, and shadows grew longer across the hills, the village eased gently into autumn. The fields were gilded with drying grasses, and the scent of apples ripening on the trees carried through every lane. Luke and Eleanor worked side by side, preparing the garden for colder weather and helping neighbors store away grain and firewood for the months ahead. The orphan girl's pockets were always filled with acorns and shiny stones, and she delighted in raking leaves into great colorful piles, leaping and tumbling while Luke and Eleanor laughed at her boundless joy. In these small moments, the quiet contentment they had found felt more real and lasting than any grand triumph or escape. The days grew busier as the village readied for the harvest festival, a celebration marked by feasts, music, and gratitude for all the earth had provided. Eleanor baked pies and brewed spiced cider, her kitchen fragrant with cinnamon and clove. Luke fashioned lanterns from hollowed gourds and crafted wooden toys for the children. The air was filled with anticipation, and the whole village seemed to glow with a kind of gentle excitement, the hardships of the past year washed away by the promise of warmth, food, and fellowship. When the night of the festival arrived, villagers gathered in the square, carrying baskets of apples, nuts, and fresh bread. The bonfire crackled, musicians played lively tunes, and laughter rippled through the crowd. Luke danced with Eleanor beneath strings of lanterns, the orphan girl spinning in circles nearby, her cheeks rosy with happiness. Old stories were told, and new friendships forged, and in the soft light, Luke and Eleanor looked at each other with a deep, wordless understanding. They had finally found their home. After the festival, the village settled into its autumn rhythm, each day a gentle winding down toward winter. Eleanor enjoyed quiet afternoons gathering herbs for tea, teaching the orphan girl to knit, and listening to Luke's stories of his own childhood, shared now without hesitation or pain. At sunset they would walk the stony paths to the cliffs, the sea glowing gold and copper beneath the sky, and give thanks for the love and peace they had fought so hard to win. On one especially clear evening, as they sat together watching the stars bloom above the dark horizon, Eleanor reached for Luke's hand and whispered, "We have come so far, haven't we?" Luke smiled, brushing a strand of hair from her cheek. "Every day with you is a journey, Eleanor, and every journey has been worth it." With the last leaves falling, Luke and Eleanor and the orphan girl huddled closer around the hearth, stories and laughter warming them against the growing chill. They knew that winter would bring new challenges, but together they faced each turning of the season with hope, courage, and a love that was no longer hidden, but woven into every corner of their lives, a quiet miracle, enduring and true. As winter's first true chill swept across the village and frost returned to the fields, Luke, Eleanor, and the orphan girl felt their world draw closer, the warmth inside their cottage burning brighter with every passing night. The last apples were gathered, the garden beds tucked beneath straw, and the woodshed stood stacked and ready for months of cold. In the evenings they settled by the fire, Luke whittling toys or mending tools, Eleanor braiding the orphan girl's hair and telling stories of summers past, of narrow escapes and small miracles, of everything they had endured to reach this moment of peace. Their laughter blended with the snap and hiss of logs, and even the darkest nights felt gentle, shielded by the bonds of love and belonging they had worked so hard to create. The village, too, huddled close for winter, neighbors sharing news and warmth, never letting anyone be alone or hungry. As snow fell in soft drifts outside their window, Eleanor baked sweet bread, filling the cottage with its comforting scent, while Luke helped repair fishing nets for the coming spring. There were times when memory stirred, when Eleanor would look up from her work and catch the flicker of old longing in Luke's eyes, or when the orphan girl asked about their journey before this home. On such evenings they spoke softly of the roads they had traveled, the storms they had survived, and the choices that had led them here, not with regret, but with gratitude for every step that had forged their new life. During the longest nights, the three would share dreams and wishes as the wind howled beyond the walls, the orphan girl imagining herself growing up strong and wise, Luke hoping for a good catch in fair weather. Eleanor wishing quietly for nothing more than what they already had: a home filled with love, laughter, and the safety of arms wrapped close. The world outside was often harsh and cold, but within their small, sturdy cottage, time slowed and grew rich, marked by the rituals of daily care and the quiet miracle of togetherness. On the eve of the new year, villagers gathered in the square to light candles and send their hopes out into the starry night. Luke, Eleanor, and the orphan girl joined them, hand in hand, their faces aglow with contentment. They knew that life would continue to offer both hardship and joy, that seasons would turn and storms would come and go, but also that they had built something that could weather anything: a life and a love no longer forbidden, but steadfast and enduring, woven into the very heart of the land they now called home. And so, as the first snowdrops pushed through the earth and a new chapter waited quietly just beyond the door, they met it with open hearts, together, ready for all that tomorrow might bring,